how did you do to make your viewport look like that? I'm an animator over at the third floor. My job to make the viewport look pretty. Just wanted to, instead of just ping him directly, I was gonna just make a video to, in case this is anybody else's question, you guys can find it, hopefully you find it useful. So we're gonna be focusing on this little tab of the viewport menu here. Some of the stuff might be a little bit basic for some people, but hopefully I'll touch up on a little bit for everybody. So if there's ever any one little button that's sort of like a make pretty button, it's going to be this anti-aliasing button. Sort of gets rid of all the jaggedy edges of all the geometries. This is off, this is on, off, on. So the second thing that is really going to help out your shot is to put some lights in the scene. So if I turn on the lighting tab here, what I have, you can tell right away that it sort of changes the kind of the mood of the whole shot, and that's really the essence of why we're sort of doing this. Not necessarily to make it look prettier, but it's just sort of to further the story of what you're trying to say. Over here's the turn lights on, over here the turn shadows on, and next to that is sort of like a self-shadowing option. So this is sort of the self-shadows on, off. So it depends. This makes the scene a lot darker. Got some weird artifacting. The overall look of this, it is all gonna fall under this little render viewport tab here. So you can see this has sort of the performance, how many lights do you want the scene to handle. It maxes out at 16 for the viewport, so if you have more than 16 lights, it's not going to work. If you want to change the sort of this little self-shadowing option here, the ambient occlusion or whatever, you can grab this sort of thing here, and if you change the amount, it's sort of the intensity of things. So this is more black, less black. The radius is sort of how much it expands from itself. So here you can see this is further apart from itself, and this is closer to itself from object to object. And then this filter size here is just sort of the blurriness of it. So if I go to 0, you see that it like does nothing. Well, it goes to 1 here, so it has a lot of these artifacting, so it just sort of like smooths it out. Another option that I didn't know about until somebody pointed it out was that over here in the shading tab there is this little option for hardware fog, and if you turn it on, and you can fiddle with it here in the settings, it whatever's closest to the camera is going to not be affected by this little filter that's putting in there. But this is how close to the camera you want it to start affecting, and then the end is sort of how far back you want it to go. The alpha here, you can have it, if you have it to, I think it defaults to 1, so I brought it down. But if you sort of keep on going, then eventually this will be a solid color. So you kind of want to go not to 100% black on that. Works for sort of pushing the background further back and the characters further forward. So that is one way to sort of create depth in the scene. For the lighting setup, I usually do a 3-point lighting. So I open up another Maya here. We'll create a cube, and then I'll go through what I did with the hug in a minute. Hide that, we don't need that. That button hides the grid. Create polygon sphere. Create polygon square. Cool. So this looks like an art class now. Awesome. All right. So that's that. And you can go under the create tab, go lights. Cool trick is that if you click on this little menu here, it sort of docks the menu off, so you can just sort of have it there. So the light that I most use is this spotlight. This one simulates just sort of a light that's coming from a bulb of light, just sort of go in one direction. So if I turn on the lighting here and I go down, you can see it's just sort of one cone of light. Usually for the lighting setup we have one main light. This is going to be like the key light, right? If we can name it here, key light. And then for whatever the light's going to be bouncing out from is going to be a fill light. I use a directional light for that. So this one sort of fills in, you know, the information we need from the other, whatever the shadow is based on. So this one would be just substantially less intense, but we don't want it to be, you know, black. So this is, you know, without, with, without, with. So this one just adds a little bit of light back into it. And then we want one light to separate the objects from the background, and this one's going to be the most intense light. So I'm going to do another spotlight here. And just going to put it behind. So if we have, this is our main light, and then this one's going to go sort of behind here, and we can put this, I like to sort of exaggerate the light to know what it's hitting first. So if I go to like 1,000, then I know this, you know, this crazy white brightness thing here is going to help. Rim lights, so this is the, you know, key, the fill, this is the rim. This, obviously we don't need it to be that crazy, but this one here is sometimes cool to have it sort of point up so it doesn't, you know, create a shadow on the ground. So you can do it from the bottom pointing up, because all this is going to do is separate, you know, our objects from the background. These are the two main lights that I use, are the spotlight and the directional light. One thing that's missing here is shadows. The key light in the scene is the only light that should have the shadows turn on, and it's sort of like if you were a painter, you'd say like, oh well, this is the main source of light, I'm going to do all the shadows towards one side. This guy is not going to be emitting shadows. Oop. And this guy here is not going to be emitting shadows. These spotlights are interesting because it doesn't matter where they're pointed to. That's not going to affect the where the shadow is. It's where it's sort of translated to that sort of, you know, changes the position, not the rotation, that matters with the spotlight. So here's a couple options for the lights. Obviously this one, the color is just sort of changes the color of the light. It's pretty self-explanatory, and the intensity is also self-explanatory. You know, more number, more bright. Decay rate is sort of how long it takes for the light to taper. So if you go to linear, what it means is that, so if you change this, the number over here, you got crank up. So it's kind of cool to grab these lights and say like, oh, I want something, you know, that sort of affects the face of the character but doesn't affect the chest that much. You'd probably go with something cubic. And then, you know, the more you can affect with the light. So if you have something that's sort of like, oh, this is a light that's a lamp in the street, you can just grab and have a linear decay or even no decay, and then just sort of leave it there, and it's sort of just flooding the scene with light. This cone angle is just sort of expands the sort of the radius of the light, the diameter of it, I guess, whatever area affects it. Penumbra angle just feathers out the edges, so that's kind of cool. You can go negative or positive, and there is no cap to this value. So it's sort of, you can, you know, it goes to 10, but if you type in 100, you know, it keeps on scale this out. So it doesn't really matter where what number you end. A interesting thing though is that the more cone angle and penumbra angle you have, the less accurate the shadows are going to be. So if you see here, the shadows start to deteriorate the more I add into this. So if we go into a very small cone angle versus a very wide one, the shadow, sort of the shadow algorithm we have is going to be affected by that. And this drop off is essentially decay rate, but it's sort of a forced version of it. So it's just saying, oh, I'm going to affect way less of it or way more of it. So this is something that you can play in tandem with the decay rate. So that's the shadows that we use over at PreVis are not these ray trace shadows. So these ones are turned on by default. And so once I switch this over to this one, you're going to see that all this crazy little artifacting that's happening is going to turn off. I'm just going to give us some other artifacting. No, but the resolution of it, we can just bump up to the max. And these filter size, the more you have here, the featherier it's going to get. One trick you can do is just you can up the color of the shadow, and then it is going to be way more transparent. So you can see that right here you see no information on it, and over here you see some information on it. You can also change the color of it to add colored shadows. So going back to the scene, this is the key light. So this is the one that's emitting the shadows of it. This is the one that's emitting shadows. This one is a fill light. So this one sort of fills in a little bit of the light that's missing into it. I put this one as blue because it's sort of like a nighttime blue background. So I went and did that, and then this one is an additional fill light, just sort of filling in the light that I would expect to see from the back of this sort of sign area over here. So that was the main light setup that I used for this animation. So that's essentially the lighting. Another reason you would use additional lights is to sort of just fill in the composition in the background. So over here I have, you know, this over here. Okay, so yeah, this is quadratic, so this is just gonna affect the background. So the characters here shouldn't change at all. And I put this to quadratic because I don't want it to reach the character. So this one just over here kind of brings another type of light that I use sometimes are these point lights. These ones just affect like a little area, like a little bulb or something. It's just sort of bringing in a little bit of highlight here to the sign from this little thing. So that's kind of cool. So just adding in a little bit more of the elements. Right now it looks a little bland, and all the little highlight things are over here. So if I add a little bit more over there, it sort of balances out the composition. So if we don't have any light, you know, this is our animation, is gonna look like this. And with light, you know, it just adds a little bit more personality to the animation we're doing. Here's the animation I did for a previous workshop, and I sort of used the same methods. This would be the key light. Yeah, this would be the key light. This one's the one that's emitting the shadows, right? This one's filling in sort of the light that's missing. And then this one here is the overall rim light of the shot. This one's for the hook. So I wanted to separate the hook from the background in this one. So I created a light specifically for this hook to add this little rim of the hook, because the main selling point of this animation is the hook. So I just wanted to make sure that I sort of showcase that more. So that's why I added this thing. I want to say about the lighting is that lighting interiors is way easier than lighting exteriors because all the lighting is kind of condensed. If you were to do this lighting, so of course this is kind of basic, but if you grab here the camera and things start, disappearing, you can add a couple zeros to that far clip in plane. And if things look kind of noisy and wonky, you can just change this to 1, and it usually kind of works. Cool. So let's just say you were an exterior and you're using this spotlight as the sun, and you're saying, okay, well, it's like way over here. Then you start getting noise. You want to make sure that so there's one of two things. The light's too far away. So now if we put the light closer, the noise disappears a little bit. If we stick the light here, let's have it over here. Now there is no noise on it. So that's why exterior shots are more difficult to light than interior shots, because sometimes the light needs to occupy more space, and you just might need to get creative on how you want to tackle that. Maybe you can have multiple lights, or I don't know. Those are hard ones to answer. It is, let's just say we have this here, and it just goes back, forever, right? And we wanted to just have this light light the majority of it right here. So we can just expand the cone angle and it reaches to more light, but the bigger the cone angle, it starts bringing in some more artifacts back into the equation over here. So this is something that you also kind of have to keep in mind. So over here, looks good, but once you start, opening it up real big, you start deteriorating the shadows, and you start, these little specks of black start kind of reappearing. So too far away or too big of a cone angle is going to damage your shot. So that's just something to keep in mind. I don't usually model anything, so where I find all this stuff is a website called sketchfab.com. A lot of people just showcase their work here and they don't make it downloadable. So you need to make sure that you hit this downloadable task, and then it's going to filter through, what you can download and what you can't. Thing you might want to do if you're not finding what you want is just sort of go for specific things. So if I put like pirate ship, it's a little broad. So this is cool, but it's not, exactly what I need for the thing that I want to do. So like maybe my animation is not gonna fit in, here. But what I could do is do something like, okay, what is gonna be in a pirate ship? So it's gonna be like barrels. You go barrel. And then, okay, cool. These are, barrels. I probably use this one. This one's awesome. I wonder why I didn't use that one. Oh, here's a collection of them. Check it out. So this one, when you hit, this one is free by Mr. Too Many Demons. Here, he's gonna give us these barrels to play with for free. Once you upload your content, you should always sort of shout out the people that you download stuff from, because that's cool. One thing you need to take into account is sort of the format these are saved in. So this is a FBX. This is perfect. So for Maya, we need FBX, OBJ, MA, or MB. If there's anything that's sort of like a Blender file, like a .blender, it's not going to work for if you use Maya, but it is going to work perfectly if you use Blender. This barrel, and it comes in with, usually it comes in with two little folders. So here's a source folder and a texture folder. I'm going to go File, Import, and then over in my desktop, texture test, and then we bring in the, alright, so this is, okay, cool, so these are the barrels. see the barrels, but they don't have any texture on them. So that is a good way to sort of show you guys a little bit hyper shader. Here's the hyper shader. So cool, it usually comes in with material, so that's kind of cool. So over here this is material for barrel 1, material for barrel 2, material for barrel 3, and then a bunch of letters and numbers. And this is a material for the kegs, so starting from the top. We go here to graph, input, output connections, and it's going to give us anything that's connected to Mr. Material 1. And there's nothing connected to it, so we're going to start from scratch here. The color, I'm going to make a file note, and then I'm going to go to my texture rig test textures, and then, these aren't named correctly, but let's just base color, open. And then now, yeah, barrel 1 texture has been connected. Cool. Alright, so I'm going to go through and connect just all the materials to not have some gray things in there. All the base things connected. So if we create a light, turn the lights on. Cool. So if you can see, these materials have a little bit of self-illumination into them. So we don't want that. So that is over here the ambient color. So if we turn this off, this is sort of fake light you can put onto each material. So if the material is always turned dark, you can always go into here and just bump up the ambient color, and you can also change the color of it. That's kind of cool. Some alien stuff, bro. But we're just going to keep it black. So that way when we create our directional fill light, we control sort of how much light these dudes are getting. And so if you want to clear this off, you go to graph, clear graph, and then you grab one of these, click input output connections. Okay, cool. So here's material for the barrel 1. I'm gonna do with this, we have the color. Now we can plug in over in this specular thing. We can plug into this guy here. Is supposed to be shiny, was not supposed to be shiny. So the cool thing about downloading these things off the net is that they bring in all these different maps. It's just sort of like a metallic map. They come in with a ton of different materials. Everybody has something like a different name for stuff. So one might say specular, one might say metallic. Just gonna have to guess here to see what they wanted to do. So barrel number 1 is metallic. Could be that one. Could be that one. So plug this in. See that now all the shininess on the it's only going to be shiny on the metal part and not on the wood part, because that's how they painted it. And I think that they usually come is with a normal map, and that little dude you plug into this bump normal map. They are based on where the normals are pointing. It's going to grab little specular highlights or not. This one's a little bit annoying because when you plug it in, it goes to this bump node. So you need to go one file over to plug in the texture. So here is non-normal. Let's check this out. It's going to look like that. So that looks pretty bad. So what you want to do is, as soon as you plug this guy in, is go to this node and just lower this one until it looks pretty decent. So you just want to sort of be able to see a little bit of it. So if we, this is nothing, and this is 0.1, but of course it comes in with 1, which doesn't work. So you just sort of have to lower it until you find a value that you can sort of look at it. And you can see the details here. So if you move the light around on it, you can sort of see the details, they're reacting with light. So if it didn't have anything, like 0.2, that could be better. Alright, so now it has like a little texture element that interacts with the light, so that's kind of cool. I'm going to go ahead and do that for the rest of Cool. So essentially, somebody else did all the work for us of modeling and texturing some awesome looking props. We just have to plug in the materials in the correct order and sort of mess around with the values, see what worked, and that is that. For people that are a little bit newer to Maya and have no idea anything about Hypershade, for our purposes, we're going to be using only 3 materials. Use a Lambert, a blend, and a surface shader. So Lamberts are essential. Well, Lamberts and blends are the exact same thing. The only difference is that blends are shiny. So if you check this out, this only has over here in the property editor thing here. This only has color, transparency, ambient color, incandescence, diffuse, and bump maps. And then blends over here have this one, and then they have a little specular map for it. For regular blends, if you're applying just like, oh, I want something to be shiny and you don't have any texture to it, that's unfortunate. Just gonna duplicate this over here. This real quick. A little better. Cool. Just for basic stuff, the blends, if you change over here the eccentricity, it sort of just makes the highlights kind of sharper, and so it makes them wider. So if you have like something material that you need to look wet, you can put this, you know, a little bit sharper, the eccentricity. And the specular roll-off thing, this kind of dims it down quite a bit. Surface shaders, it has the environment doesn't affect it. So the light, our light here, doesn't matter like how intense this thing is, it's not going to affect that shader. So if you need something that needs to stay at a constant no matter what, use a surface shader for it. So there's another one. If you see it without light, yeah, it's way not exciting. But with the light, it's kind of adds a little mood to it, so it's kind of cool. So 2 things with this file. One is these things here have a animated texture put into it. If I open up Hypershade here, it has plugged in to here the image file, just as before, but over in the attribute editor, you need to check on the image sequence, and if it is sequenced in, so we go here, it is this. Yeah, so it's sort of a sequence that I got off of a flame on a green screen. So I can show you guys real quick how I did that. Cool. Alright, so here is, this is free stock footage. Give this thing to a new comp. And look, on a black screen like this, it's actually kind of perfect because you can just go here, effect, and keying, and then extract, and then you're going to pull this. Okay, wait. You want to change the color of your background to anything, because the default color is black. So what you want to do is sort of bring that in and grab whatever part of the video you want and select a piece of it, and then when you go to export it, so this is going to export with a transparent background like that. So a couple things to see when you export it is you want to export it as a PNG sequence, and important that you have to change this to RGB plus alpha to render transparency. You might want to change the starting frame to 1, and second part that's super important is over here. You are going to want to change this, so you're exporting here to your source images. Same in folder is going to be candle test, right? And then what you want to do, and the most important part, is that Maya only reads as a sequence what has a dot under it. So if you go here and you change this to candle test, you gotta make sure you put a dot here instead of an underscore, and that is the most important part of the whole process. If you save this, then you render it out, bring it in here into Maya, and you have an animated texture that is this it's cool. So one caveat about using planes as sort of things that move is that you might want to not use this ambient occlusion, because creating this shadow right here is part of the card. So that is something to keep in mind. Things in the light, so for example these ones here show lights. These lights right here show polygons, are animated, as you can see. Any of these attributes are animatable. So for example, here's the intensity sort of going up and down. If I hit the graph editor, you can see the intensity I just went in and randomly copied, pasted, and scaled numbers sort of go in there and be part of animation, just sort of animate the intensity of the lights. Another thing, you can use the hardware fog. Yeah, cool. So this one adds a little bit of atmosphere, putting the hardware fog onto it. So it adds quite a bit to the scene just to have the hardware fog on. So if we turn it off, this kind of doesn't add that much depth to the scene. So one thing I did, is kind of a cheat that you can add, is I really wanted to separate this guy from his background. So I created these little planes and I put transparent material onto them to be able to, this is a little busier than this, and this is a lot busier than that. So that's another way you can sort of force the hardware fog onto the scene by just making a new material and putting that into the scene and just putting a transparency value on the material, and that way you can use it as a little card to separate one or the other. All of this is cheated. As you can see, there's no actual scene here. It's just a bunch of objects placed in the scene, and over here it looks like it's all populated and he's in a pirate ship or a bar or whatever, but the truth is this, I just sort of have here whatever's necessary to tell the story, so I'm not going overboard with it. One place where you can find some inspiration for all of this kind of shot frame. If you're having trouble with shot framing, or trouble with lighting, or trouble with, you know, anything that is related to that sense, you can always check out, there's a website called shotdeck.com. You need to make a username and a password, but it's free. Cool. Okay, so this is ShotDeck, and then over here you can say like moody lighting. Boom, and then it just brings you in with a bunch of compositions that you can sort of check out the colors from. You can check out how it's lit, check out the composition. You can check out, see where the, you know, characters are being lit. You know, super cool, moody lighting. You can also bring in here, you know, oh, I want something with cool colors, and then it'll give you a bunch of inspirational shots, and then, you know, magenta, whatever. You can say, oh, I want something nighttime. It'll just bring you, you know, ideas for shots. Super cool. You can add a red light on a blue character. And you just like take stuff out of, you know, whatever it is that is out there that professionals have done, and you can incorporate it to your own work. So it's kind of cool. Okay, another website that might help you out is evanerichards.com. So this one doesn't have that much of a robust sort of search into it, but what it is it goes through a bunch of famous films, like let's say Ex Machina here. It gives you this sort of in storyboard form, you know, it just grabs shots from throughout the movie, so you can grab your favorite film and then you can make a composition that's a cool looking shot. You know, you can sort of frame your characters and use sort of the same lighting and colors that was used in your favorite films. So it's kind of cool, very cool, very cool website. So I don't know, whatever. See, Hellboy. Let's say you're doing some intense, crazy dialogue scene, then you might light it from above, kind of add the one of these hardware fog things in the back, all blue, then have the character sort of warm colors, and then the background cool colors, look for some contrast. Let's say you are all done, ready to go, and you wanted to, so you want to playblast this guy here. One option you should keep in mind while doing the playblast, if you want this to render out at a specific dimension and aspect ratio, you need to go to the playblast option box. So I'm right clicking on the timeline, playblast option box, and then you're in the display size, you're going to go from render settings. That way it matches up to whatever you've done, matches up for whatever you've put over here in the render setting. So now whenever you hit the playblast button, it doesn't matter, you know, what size your window is, it is going to always render out at 1920 by 1080. So with all the tools that I have sort of shown you here, is essentially it's going to add to your skill set and add to your storytelling abilities, and it's, for me, it's fun. You learn something new. Cool. So hopefully this helps out, and if anybody has any questions, you can leave them on the comments and I'll do my best